And welcome to episode 32 of The Hex with Daniel Robertson, John Arnold, Armand.
It's 33.
It's
33.
Is it 33?
Yeah.
Oh, 33. All right. The Kenny Cooper episode of The Hex this week. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Give a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Go ahead and give us a 5-star rating if you are on Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to Getting CONCACAF with John Arnold at John Arnold FC on YouTube as well. Be sure to subscribe to Footy Analytics Musings on SUBSTACK with Armand Kafai.
It's been a bit of a break, but we'll be back. The salary cap reports and
stuff.
When
are you coming back?
I think next week.
All right.
I actually have time to look through the salary cap stuff, thankfully. So.
All right. Well, there will be no salary.
I'm not as hardworking as John. What can I say? That's why
I'm daily right now.
Daily. I think you got to grind, and it's only going to keep going from there with Leagues Cup. We got so much stuff we're getting into. But today we have got 6 topics getting into the Gold Cup, MLS, Club World Cup. Let's get into it. The United States men's national team got their ticket to the semifinals of the Gold Cup on Sunday night, a back-and-forth seesaw 2-2 final against Costa Rica, and then Matt Freese making 3 saves in the PK shootout to seal a semifinal spot on Wednesday night against Guatemala. Armand, lots to break down from this game, but as you look at it, what changed about your view of the national team after Sunday night looking into Wednesday?
Well, I mean, when we talked about the group stage, it was kind of like, okay, they were expected to kind of do what they did. Then you face a tough team like Costa Rica, a legitimately tough match with El Piojo on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. And what you saw was a team that really went through, really difficult situations to get the result that they wanted. I mean, think about it. The early penalty from Max Arfsten, which was just kind of a brain-dead challenge. Then they came back and made it 1-1. Oh, they took the lead, and then Costa Rica scored late, off a moment where, the U.S. was, I would probably say, dominating throughout. Then it goes to penalties, and you have Matt Freese stepping up. For me, it showed resilience, and it showed, I think, a couple players that, I think had pretty strong things. I think it was really funny that Max Arfsten was player of the game across.
You were hating on him the entire game.
Hold on.
I mean, he wasn't good.
Me or you? What you want to repeat?
I would say everyone.
Everybody.
We were all watching together, and the room was.
He contributed to all 4 goals somehow in some way. Like he was, but
he did. That's a good point. He did contribute to every single goal. Yeah. Not something you want to say about a defender, though.
Yeah, not something you want to say about a defender.
It's like that supposed curse that people say, like, may you live at interesting times. May you be an interesting fullback. Like, he had great moments going forward. He had really bad moments at the back. And I guess that's just the Arfsten experience.
He's a wingback at the club level. He's not a fullback. So, but it really, to me, it really showed it was a real test for Mauricio Pochettino with a group that is, still trying to gel together. We know the U.S. is missing plenty of players, which they haven't really made that excuse at all, unlike Jesse Marsch just did. But they are, I think, really trying to get it together. And I don't want to talk about what changed for me because I think we have a topic about that coming up.
Okay.
But
we'll let him cook. We'll let him cook, John.
I really liked what I saw from them.
Wasn't this the topic about the change?
Yeah, there's a topic I think about the change that in my mind that came up.
Sure.
All right, well, I'll talk about the change that I feel like I saw, which is that I think that, like, you could argue that this isn't quite right, but I think it's the U.S. that understood the difference between a group match and a knockout match.
Good point.
They rode their luck in some ways. They shouldn't have conceded that second goal. As soon as they did, we were watching it together. What do we all say? You can't go to a penalty shootout. You cannot have Keylor Navas versus Matt Freese. But then Freese delivers. And after the game, he's like, yeah, penalties are my thing. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Goalkeepers are going to say that. No. This guy did like a Harvard research study
paper on it.
On penalties. Penalties are this guy's thing. And he was studying on the plane. And he was, you could see the work that him and Tony Jimenez, the goalkeeper coach, had done because, I think the commentator even said, like, he's not guessing. And he wasn't. Like, he knew exactly where each Costa Rica taker was going to go. And I think the U.S. in a lot of ways was the better prepared team, which should be easy not to in this type of game where you feel like you're the dominant team. We'll get into Canada, but I do think that the U.S. also, Pochettino after the game said, we need games like this to get this experience for this group. This group specifically needed these kind of games. He's right. It doesn't matter if you don't learn from it. So I think that in some ways, not that you asked me for a grade, but I'm stamping incomplete here because I think that if they do the exact same thing against Guatemala, who we've seen is maybe more dangerous than people want to give them credit for, if they ride their luck again, concede a goal they shouldn't concede, have to go to the penalty spot, see what happens, then it's like, oh, you didn't learn anything from this game. But I do think that this was a good learning experience against a team that, at least on paper, we think is more difficult than Guatemala, will be in the semifinals. So yeah, next time we have an episode, of course, we'll be talking about that. But overall, I think that the U.S. understood what it means. And isn't that what Mauricio Pochettino is here for? To win knockout matches in the U.S. in big tournaments? I think that's why he's here.
And that was my what I learned from the game, because it came out before the game, and obviously this report turned out to be incorrect. Probably. There's always,
agents are always talking,
Who talked to who? We know Mauricio Pochettino did not talk to, was it Wolves for their opening?
Brentford.
Brentford. We know that Mauricio Pochettino did not talk to Brentford. Did Greg Pochettino, his brother, talk to Brentford, perhaps? I don't know.
Greg with 2 G's.
Greg with 1 G. By the way, diabolical work to cut straight to Greg Berhalter after his son misses
after Seb Berhalter misses a penalty. And honestly, like, it was a totally mature, like, as you'd expect. I mean, look, like, people trash on Berhalter, but Berhalter Sr. and Seb have both, like, comported themselves in the most mature possible way, basically since they've been in the eye of the storm, right? He's just like, you could see he's a disappointed dad. He's just like, man, bummer. And then, but no, he's not freaking out. He's not yelling. Like, yeah, but you're right.
But yeah, so the report came out before the match that he may have interviewed in some capacity through proxy or whatever for the Brentford job, and you're thinking, man, is Pochettino even invested in this job? Should he be fired? Then it comes out he categorically denies it, regardless of what the reports are. Fine, great. And then you see the emotion from him during the match. And so what I learned is that Pochettino is very invested in this job when we thought maybe he wasn't. And because he was not that emotional in the group stage games, which I think is fair because those games don't really matter that much. And this was probably the biggest game, obviously.
Jamaica.
Obviously, yeah. Well, obviously the biggest game he's coached since he became in charge. He gets another game, another data point, and another chance to see what his team is going to bring. Hopefully 2 more games. But to me, it showed the emotion from him after the match, the way he was celebrating. Maybe that's a little bit fanboy of me to think like, oh, this guy cares about us. But like, it did seem to be genuine emotion, and it does seem he's bought into it. And that tells me there was probably players at home that didn't go to the tournament thinking, man, I kind of wish I was there right now. And I kind of wish I did have another game to prepare for.
Have you seen those AI job interviews where it's like a person doing an interview and the like hiring manager is just like a meta character?
No.
Oh man, it's all over the internet. But I wonder if you said, maybe Pochettino interviewed through a proxy, like maybe he flipped the script, the script and sent AI Pochettino. What would that be?
AI Pochettino.
Yeah. Is it the AI is capitalized in Mauricio? Like, so. There is kind of, I don't want to say elephant in the room. The biggest talking point of the Gold Cup right now for me, we know Malik Tillman's looking great. His move to Bayer Leverkusen may be sealed. Matt Freese is looking like he could be the U.S. number 1. Patrick Agyemang, this was the guy. He was given the keys both by roster selection, player availability. There has been no one else to play the number 9 role, and that means he has played almost every minute of every game. I think he's come off for about 15, 20 minutes combined in the 4 games of the Gold Cup. He has 2 goals. He has no assists. He is rumored to be making a move to England for about 7-8 million pounds, depending. John, as you're looking at it so far, and there are more data points left, he can change his story. But through 4 games, which is a pretty good sample size, where does he stand for you with regards to making the U.S. national team for the 2026 World Cup?
Off the roster.
Yeah.
I think that if you have healthy 9s, namely Balogun and Pepe, Agyemang is in this place where he's fighting for that 3rd spot. And I haven't seen enough from him to where I want him more than some of the other options. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sort of doing a little future casting here because I'm a fan of how Brandon Vasquez plays the game. He could be on the roster and isn't. But I wouldn't be surprised if he has a good second half of the season for Austin FC, gets into some of these fall matches for the U.S., maybe even plays in some of the build-up games and takes the spot. Now, also possible that Agyemang has a great time wherever he ends up in Derby, I think is like the strongest rumor. And you're like, oh yeah, he needs to be on the roster because he's scoring. Josh Sargent, another name that we haven't mentioned, who like gives you something different than big nine in the box who can head the ball in, but also hasn't done it for the national team, right? So I think that he's, you wanted to see him take his spot and be the third forward on the roster if you take three, but it seems like he's in that sort of mush of like guys on the fringe who you have maybe third on the forward depth chart at best.
Well, and the problem is too, if you see a few guys that typically make the roster in a World Cup that maybe in no spot are they even top 2 or 3, but they're kind of like top 5 or 6 at almost every spot. Where when you have like a Kellen Acosta, right, who made the last World Cup, where when you can play 4 or 5 positions.
Well, Moose is in that profile, right? Where it's like Pochettino feels comfortable playing him at fullback, at midfielder, at winger, and it's
you get a red card, you get an injury, you can plug this guy in, and Agyemang is so one-dimensional and can really only play one position. I think that's going to make it really difficult for him, and I think we do need to give him some credit. He had a couple of really good touches in build-ups to attacking moments. I think he had a really good touch in a build-up to a goal, but he doesn't. I don't know that he does enough, Armand. Did he do enough for you to raise his stock? And again, it's like this is your chance. You are going to get 300 plus minutes, close to probably 4. If they make the final, he's going to get close to like 500 minutes in this tournament.
This is the change I was talking about. I know I was kind of joking with you guys saying $8 million guy, $8 million guy. I still don't think it's worth $8 million. Charlotte FC should take the money and run with that. However, where are you guys imagining Agyemang on the team when you look at, let's say he's a third or fourth striker in the World Cup? Where would he be coming on? In my opinion, he's not starting for sure. I don't see him starting at all in a game. I see him as a guy, and you saw this in moments. I don't see him as a 75, 80-minute player. I see him as a 50-minute player on an international level.
Yeah.
And when you see him there, you see a guy who can hold the ball. Yeah. You see a guy who can win the ball. You see a guy who can draw fouls. This is a perfect player to use as a sub, and I think he's making his case in that really well. I would bring him on at this moment right now.
But do you think they trust him like that? Because not only is he... I agree that he has some good touches. He's not bad in the build-up. He's had, like, the moment he scores in the Haiti game, it's like this triumphant, like, oh my gosh, I did it, F the haters, in a way. Haiti or Saudi? They're all kind of blending together for me.
Well, Haiti.
He scored against Haiti and El Salvador. Or not El Salvador, Trinidad.
He definitely didn't score against El Salvador. But the game is clearly going to penalties, and Pochettino and the staff hook him.
Yeah.
Is that what you do for a forward that you definitely won at the World Cup? I don't think so.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, though, Armand, where the scenario you bring him in is you're winning with 15 minutes left in the game. You need a forward. Now, it's weird to think of a forward that you bring in when you're winning versus when you're losing, but you bring him in, you can, if say you're pinned back against the defense, you're trying to lump balls up to a guy that can hold the ball, that can draw fouls,
if they're
get whistles. Right.
If they're sitting back, right, and like with an expanded World Cup, right, there is a chance that there's going to be, a lot, there's going to be, I don't think the football is going to be as pretty as people want to make out with the expanded World Cup, just because there's going to be a few weaker teams, I think, within there. There is going to be situations to where you're playing as teams that are bunkering, sitting back, and you're forced to play direct. And Agyemang, I mean, I saw him pretty up close when I went to the U.S. Haiti match. He's huge, like legitimately huge. And he knows how to use his body well. He's really physical, and he has a great touch in those situations. I think he's a guy that you can plug in and say, "Hey, we need to break down a team. We're struggling to break him down. But we can have him as an off forward. We can have him as a forward to try to win those balls, to win those things, to find Pulisic, to find whoever the other Weah or whatever winger is going to be there, etc., and help create those opportunities versus being the guy."
But I'm not saying there's no use case for him. I'm saying that when you're building a World Cup roster, yeah, of course you'd like to have that guy. Of course you'd like to have a fullback who's really good at getting forward and sending in crosses. You'd like to have a center back who's good at the air that you could bring in the 80th minute to just head away balls if the team is pumping crosses in. You'd like to have a fourth goalkeeper, but you can't. like the squad is not big enough for that. And I understand what you're saying, but I don't know that you prioritize that role of like, yes, that's a good use case. Yes, I think he can be useful. I just am not sure that he's going to beat out the other players who could potentially do the same thing.
The memes were flying after Canada was eliminated from the Gold Cup at the quarterfinal stage on Sunday, falling to Guatemala in PKs, which, by the way, I saw the video of Carlos Ruiz celebrating from the commentary booth. You love it. This was the first time, in 29 years, I think it was, that Guatemala
1996.
1996. That's crazy. That Guatemala has made the Gold Cup semifinal, and we'll talk about Central America in our next segment. But for Canada, Jesse Marsch said before the tournament he couldn't keep any players off the roster. Then after the tournament, he's saying, well, we were struggling with players missing. There was no Alphonso Davies, but there's some egg on their face, and this is the first adversity he has faced as manager. John, where did it go wrong for a Canada team that got 7 points from the group stage but is exiting after the quarterfinals?
I mean, even 7 points from the group stage, I think, was a little bit of, alarm bells ringing, because against Curacao, they needed to do something, either push for another goal or a goal, or defend better, and they didn't do either. So I think in the group stage, you saw a little bit of that fragility that maybe exists. Like Jesse Marsch saying that half his team was missing is just not accurate. But I do think that there were very important absences. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important one was Moise Mombito, the center back. Alphonso Davies is the spiritual heart of the team, absolutely, but he probably would have been at the Club World Cup anyway. Stefano Eustáquio, important player at the Club World Cup, not really a big factor for Porto. We'll see what happens after that tournament. Now they're also moving on from Martin Anselmi. But for Canada, I just think that, Jacob Schaffelberg's red card totally changes the complexion of the game. They still had a pretty good second half, but couldn't stop Guatemala from scoring. And also, as I think he's a really good player, I think he deserves the move that he's about to get, maybe to your boys in Turin, Daniel. But Jonathan David scored from the spot, but wasn't really dangerous enough in this open play. So, I think sort of everything kind of, you could say, was not terrible for Canada, but also nothing was amazing this entire tournament. And I think against Guatemala, of course, the complexion of the game changes after the red card, but that's also how the game goes. And I think this Canada team consistently finds itself in these sorts of positions of being so close. And you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Canada's doing this. And then they lose. Well, they did it in the Nations League. Yeah. They did it in this Gold Cup. They did it in the last Gold Cup and the last Gold Cup and the one before that in 2019 when they lost to Haiti in the quarterfinals. They did it in Copa America. What an amazing run. But then fourth place. It just seems that there's still either players missing or mentality missing or maybe both, but it doesn't seem like they know how to become one of the consistent giants in CONCACAF, even though they keep playing footsie and flirting with that status, right? So I think a combination of everything went wrong. I wrote today in the newsletter that you so kindly plugged before the show, Daniel, that I think one of the big effects is now you have to simulate intensity, because their next official match is June 12th, 2026 at BMO Stadium, where they open their World Cup.
Where Jacob Schaffelberg will not be playing, by the way. No Schaffelberg. Armand, we talked about, though, when we were watching the game, it seems to me like Jesse Marsch, look, it's a double-edged sword when you create the mentality that he is creating within his roster of no one's going to come in here and push us around. But then they get this red card, and it seemed like they were picking fights, and they were losing their head when they needed to say, look, even with 10 men, we are man for man better on the field than this Guatemala team is, but they seem to be just concerned with picking fights.
Yeah, it seems like Jesse Marsch has built this mentality of this fiery. I mean, he was under investigation by CONCACAF at the beginning of the tournament as well, too, although it was pretty funny why that was. But look, it just seems like the team has a little too much fire in some situations. Like it was a tackle, I can't remember, I think it was on Jemison or something, where the entire bench gets up, gets in the face
It was
the
a totally
Guatemalan
clean
players.
tackle.
Why is this happening? You are supposed to be the favorite team. You need to be pushing for pushing. I don't care if you're down a man. You need pushing for a second goal or organizing in some way to push for that second goal. To me, they're locked in this underdog mentality, and like when they're the favorite, they're like, we don't know what to do here. We're like,
yeah, I think Mexico's a team that manages that well, right? When a team bunkers against Mexico and they try and chip and do goofy tackles and throw a couple elbows and do sneaky bits behind the referee's back, Mexico sort of manages it well usually, and they do sometimes play down to the opponent, I think, but they manage that portion of the game well. And I think that Canada has done well to be that fiery team. It happened under Herdman. It continued under Marsh. But I think you're the team with a chip on your shoulder when you're playing Argentina at the Copa America. You're the team that should be swaggering, dominant, and say, oh, really? You're trying to get under our skin when you're playing Guatemala in the quarterfinals of the Gold Cup. And I agree that sort of flexibility hasn't arrived yet for Canada.
If I was a Canada fan coming off of this match, speaking of that mentality, and maybe that's why it worked so well in Copa America, is because they're not the favorite in any match, and they can come into it with that chip on their shoulder. And by the way, Jesse Marsh got really mad when people questioned, when a journalist questioned, what are you going to do if plan A doesn't work out? And he said, well, I've got plan B, C, D, E, F, plan Z, right? Well, you clearly didn't really have that plan against Guatemala. If I'm a Canada fan going into the World Cup in their draw, right, they're going to get 3 teams. Probably 2 of them are going to be on their level or worse than them in the group because they're going to be seeded, because that's how it's going to work. And we know that expanded World Cup is not going to have as strong teams. What happens when Canada gets drawn against that Eastern European team that is probably technically about the same as Guatemala? And they're going to get in their head and they're going to push them and they're going to elbow them, and Canada's going to get frustrated. And they've got to be this team that beats worse teams in front of them. But if the mentality is, well, we're going to be the one that punches you in the face first, it's going to cause them issues like we saw against Guatemala.
And Jesse Marsh, I mean, for what it's worth, like, he's had good moments, but it just seems like he's always kind of focused on other things that isn't like Canada, like talking about the U.S. vacancy, or when it was a vacancy, talking about the
People
U.S. national
draw
team.
him offside, to be fair.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, dude, focus on your team. Just make a whatever, really normal comment and move on. Like, to me, this is a failure for the, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
It is a failure.
I thought they'd make the final, and to lose against Guatemala in a game where they lost their head, where they weren't necessarily dominant. Obviously they're down, man. It's hard to be dominant, but to do this and say, yeah, we're gonna go crazy in the World Cup, et cetera, next, all this stuff. It's like, all right, maybe calm that talk a little bit.
We mentioned that Guatemala is in the semifinals for the first time in 29 years, but actually there is also 2 Central American teams in the semifinals for the first time since 2013. And if there is a big story about this tournament, obviously people are going to be talking about USA, Mexico, Canada, but this is a tournament where Central America has showed dominance over the Caribbean, who does not have a team in the semifinals. John, what does this mean kind of for Central American soccer and the upcoming World Cup qualifying, which is basically Central America versus the Caribbean for spots in the World Cup?
Not quite, because there's one group that's all Caribbean. So I wrote this thing after the Gold Cup group stage. I was like, well, what's wrong with these Caribbean teams? And it's like, one of them is going to the World Cup, guaranteed, because someone has to. It's probably Jamaica or Curacao. That's going to be an interesting one. But I do think that this sort of wake-up call that was given to Central American teams recently has been heated. Honduras specifically looked terrible. They went in World Cup qualification to Caribbean teams and would just slog through games and win 1-0. They needed an own goal against the Cayman Islands to get a victory in World Cup qualification.
That game was hilarious on FOTMob, by the way.
I mean, wait, why?
Because it was they had 50 shots or something like that.
I was watching it. Yeah, I was watching
it. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I thought you meant something was bugging out with you.
Oh, no. It was it was 50 shots to 0.
Yeah, I mean, but look, just because you're controlling the game, you should beat Cayman Islands by several goals. So, I mean, I think the wake-up call has been heated. I think these teams understand sort of what they need to do at this stage. They're quite different cases for me. I think that Guatemala, the way that Honduras, there's like an expression where you say they went from like less to more in the group stage or more to less. Honduras clearly went from less to more, where they got smashed up by Canada in that first game. And that's like the funny thing about a tournament, right? It's clearly Canada. If you play that game 100 times, Canada probably wins, what do we want to say, 80, 85?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A significant number. And yet, Honduras is in the semifinal. So credit to them, to manager Ronaldo Reda for kind of using that warning. I think that's kind of, for me, the big thing, both in the short term and the long term. These Central American teams are realizing, oof, we got to compete here. I think Guatemala is a good example of a Central American team that their league is not amazing, and they've had some imports, but they're not over-reliant like some Caribbean teams on players who maybe they don't feel as committed, maybe they don't want to show up, maybe they get injured, totally normal things, but like Guatemala has Aaron Herrera, they have Rubio Rubin, they have Olga Escobar from Montreal, who came in through the Red system. Another player came in through the Red system, and then it's basically just Guatemalan guys, based guys from the National League, and I think that does foster sort of this environment that really works well. So I think that in some ways that's a blueprint, but also looking ahead to World Cup qualification, which every single team has said, we don't really want to win this Gold Cup. We really want to qualify for the World Cup, and if we win the Gold Cup, that'd be a nice bonus. I think it's obviously speaks well to these teams and really drives up the stakes for qualification, because Panama, who was not in this semifinal, is a huge favorite to go to the World Cup, and then Guatemala, who is in that same group. So it's all getting very tight. Teams are getting very nervous, and the fall, I think, is going to be fantastic.
Do you think that, I mean, I didn't really think about this prior to even this segment, but how much it may have benefited a team like Guatemala that they've basically been together for over a month now, because they played
absolutely
three World Cup qualifiers right before the tournament, and it doesn't seem like they've had to kind of work their way in as maybe some teams have, whereas Guatemala's hit the ground running, and just the way that they played. Even against the Canadian team, yes, they were up a man, but the entire tournament feels like they've been very composed. They haven't been giving up a lot of crappy goals, unlike a El Salvador team that's looked terrible. Guatemala has been pretty solid.
But I mean, all those teams work together for qualification, which we thought, or at least I thought, was going to benefit like a Caribbean team like Jamaica. When Jamaica has been together for a long time, they've usually been good, because some of these players who don't commit, if they're in the squad, obviously they're there and they don't bail after 2 games typically. So I think them losing some of the players after the World Cup qualifiers and that didn't come to the Gold Cup was a huge blow for them. They couldn't overcome. I'm talking about specific cases here, but I think that also kind of holds overall. I definitely think it's helpful for these teams to be together for this amount of time. I think Guatemala, like I said, has this feeling of unity. They lost one of those World Cup qualifiers when they rotated the squad. But even that, you could say, well, that gave them some freshness. And they played that same Jamaica team a couple days later. They were aggressive in the press. We talk about like, hey, which team goes in dominant? Which team goes on feeling like they should win? Guatemala had no doubt that they were going to win that game, or that they were going to play in a way that gave them an opportunity to win the game. There was no bunker. There was no sit back. They pressed aggressively from the front. The defenders defended well, even though you have that sort of typical size under-reliant, I don't like to get super into the like body type that some people believe in, all that stuff, but like Guatemala has a lot of short guys. So you have this defensive line trying to stop Jamaica or Canada's forwards, and I think they've done really well. Even just to keep Canada to the goal from the penalty spot, I think really speaks about how aggressive, how well they've played, and yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe that doesn't make a huge macro point about Central America, but it's definitely interesting and feels a little fresh. Even if it's US-Mexico in the final, all 3 of the quarterfinals that were CONCACAF teams that didn't have the guest team, Saudi Arabia, went to penalties. Man, it just feels like the margins are narrowing. Whether the North American teams are getting worse or the other teams are getting better, like we've always hoped since the Nations League started, I'm not entirely sure. We'll get more of a sample size, but I think it's generally good news for fans here.
Well, mentioning the Nations League, that was something I was literally just about to say to Ramon, was I feel like this could be a product of Nations League as well, because we are seeing that gap tightening, and this is the first time. Not only I mentioned obviously 2 Central American teams making the semifinals, there wasn't a single Caribbean team in the quarterfinals, which is kind of crazy to think about. Real quick, Armand, as you look ahead now, we saw Guatemala against Canada, the semifinals, which will be played on Wednesday night. We're recording this Tuesday late afternoon. USA, Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras. Where do you think the USA can focus on trying to get past Guatemala, which, originally we were looking at this USA Canada blockbuster, but now the entire tenor of this thing has changed, because we also said, okay, if the USA loses in penalties to Canada in the semifinals, maybe that's not the end of the world. It's kind of a holding serve type thing. But now it's completely changed. You have to make the final. What does the USA need to focus on a little bit against Guatemala?
They're gonna have to break. I wouldn't say Guatemala's gonna be super expansive in their play. Like, that's not gonna happen. They're gonna be bunkering quite a bit and trying to hit on the counter. And if that's the case, that's going to happen, then you need to, break down teams, essentially. That's all it is. You need to break down teams, try not to play as direct as you want to, get in those right positions, and go forward by breaking that team through passing. And, there was moments where Costa Rica was also, I would say, bunker and trying to smash the U.S. on the counter. And the U.S. were exposed in some moments. I will say Guatemala probably isn't as technically good as, Costa Rica is. So those opportunities will be, I think, a little bit fewer for Guatemala, but for the U.S., it's taking advantage of not that much space in the middle. The midfielders will not have that much space to operate in. When you talk about if it's Seb Berhalter, if it's Tyler Adams, if it's Malik Tillman, who got beat the hell up in the game against Costa Rica. And for a guy like Malik Tillman, he's gonna get beat up again, for sure, 1,000%.
Well, and to wrap, but John, there is an interesting tweak to why he might not get beat up, right? If you're a Guatemala, what do you have to be careful about?
Oh, yeah. Well, their yellow cards will carry over, and they really care about World Cup qualification. Their red cards would definitely carry over. So they're definitely conscious of that. Luis Fernando Tena, the manager, has said multiple times, hey, we got to watch out for this. And he's totally right. Because, again, it seems funny, but every team that's involved, Panama, Curacao, Guatemala, Honduras, all these teams have said, hey, we like the Gold Cup. We're happy to be here. But the focus is the fall. And, if that's your mindset, that's your mentality, you might pull out of that tackle instead of beating up Malik Tillman.
Before the Club World Cup, we kind of mentioned a little bit that, we're going to see if the gap is closing between European teams, South American teams, Asian teams. I guess I would lump Middle East into Asia, since they do play in the Asian Champions League. So last night, Monday night, was a bit of a tectonic shift in some ways in the Club World Cup, in the sense that we saw the Champions League finalists, Inter Milan, fall 2-0 to Fluminense. And then probably the shock so far of the entire tournament, one of the best games so far of the tournament, Al Hilal, after extra time, 4-3 winners over Manchester City, last year's Champions League winners, and obviously the Premier League champions recently as well. Armand, does this say much about the gap closing, or is this just an aberration? Is it European teams are in a tough spot right now? I don't think you can say they don't care. You have to say they care based on what the way that Pep Guardiola was coaching that game last night. But what was your impressions coming out of that? That was a game we were all kind of locked into.
I kind of got my impressions after the group stage that the gap was a little bit smaller than I had perceived. I don't think the gap was as big, especially when the South American teams are playing the European teams. I thought the gap was a little bit bigger, but you saw the South American teams really put up a fight and win in some cases against the European teams. Now, obviously, there is some caveats, right? I think you can say they care, but also there was a gap in their seasons. So the Brazilian teams are in the middle of their seasons, sure, etc. But there's definitely something that's okay, after the group stage, when I saw, I was okay, it's a little bit less. I think these results really don't change my mind on it, because, Daniel, we've talked about Al Hilal a lot. Would you compare them to when we were talking?
Who did I compare them to? I forget.
You said they're almost like a mid-table / kind of on the fringe of Europa League, or something, a qualification team based on their spending.
Of course, Milinkovic, Savic, Koulibaly, Joao Cancelo, Renan Lodi, Malcolm. These are players that would play for your Europa League teams.
Right. So to me, I don't think that it's an indictment as a whole, but more just on an individual team level. because Al Hilal is not going to represent your Royal Red Diamonds. Like to me, like though, like Al Hilal is his own thing. The Saudis are their own kind of thing when it comes down to the Asia side of things. But for me, the gap was shown after the group stage versus when you're looking into the knockout stages, John.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, man, because I think that that's some of the issue we run into when we talk about the gap. Even when we talk about Liga MX versus MLS, when we use Leagues Cup, oh my gosh, MLS teams are winning, but they never play games in Mexico. When we talk about the CONCACAF Champions Cup, oh my gosh, Mexican teams are so far ahead. But overall, I think that like it's often just the individual teams, and it's who's best versus best really gets through. And I agree with you that in the initial stage you saw, man, some of these South American teams, even some of them who aren't the best, are winning, or teams that like fans think are bad. In the case of like Botafogo, beats PSG, and the fans hate Paiva, and he eventually gets fired because they can't get out past a Brazilian team. So, I think sometimes these one-off results can obviously be liars, but I definitely feel that, and again, small sample size, but as the sample size gets larger, I think more and more you say, man, like this really is the world's game. And even though the talent goes to Europe and the best teams are still absolutely there and they have the best facilities, best nutrition, best coaching, that doesn't mean that, and I don't think any of us obviously would have said this before the Club World Cup, that doesn't mean other leagues are trash. That doesn't mean other leagues don't play good soccer. We know there's talent in MLS, in Mexico, in Brazil. As much as sometimes roll my eyes like Saudi, sure. Like, well, obviously after this one, and some of that's foreign, but I think some of that is domestic as well, where some of the talent is getting better there with a rising tide sort of lifting some boats there, and we'll see what their national team looks like in 2034. Right now, they can't score goals, so yikes. But yeah.
I think it's really interesting, though, too, because, if you look at, like, the Saudi League, okay, Al Ittihad, Al Hilal, and Al Nasser, those are the two that are, or the three that are far at the top of the table that really do compete above.
And the rest are probably worse than MLS.
Right, and the rest are worse than MLS. But that's kind of what we're learning, right, is that there's levels to everything. And I do think we saw Inter Miami get completely exposed against PSG. That was embarrassing for the league. It was 4-0. If they had started that game down 9-0, they would have turned around that result. Like if you had given them the Elam ending or whatever it is, and it's like 9,
get to 10.
Right, get to 10, they would have gotten to 10 if it was 8-0, they would have gotten to 10 before Inter Miami would have. I don't think we could say that about a Fluminense. There are a few Brazilian teams that, going into the tournament, we would have said are much better than MLS teams. And I think we come out of it saying these Brazilian teams are still, the top Brazilian teams are still much better than MLS teams. Argentina, I don't know. But have these Argentine teams really been, but have they been competing? These teams haven't even been competing in
but dude, listen, like what we're kind of talking around is that it's money.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, look, I get that Manchester City has a stacked, loaded, rich squad, and they can buy whoever they want to and do. But ultimately, what we're talking about is money, and that's how a lot of these leagues work, right? That's how Mexico works. It's not how MLS works necessarily. That's how Mexico works. That's how Brazil works. And then you talk about Libertadores. Well, okay, Argentina's two giants are Boca and River, but they haven't been competing in Copa Libertadores in the last several years. Why? Because the Argentine economy is in this tailspin. Milei, no one knows what they're going to do. It's this big, strange situation. They're talking about taking foreign investment, but most clubs don't or can't. So it's all about the money, man. And that's like, look, as much as, and all of us are romantics and we love the sport, and Armand's wearing a jersey that even I've never seen, and, I'm talking about Real Estelí or whatever, but like, ultimately it does come down to this. The most talented players are going to demand the most money, and the rich dudes who pay that are going to have the best teams. Now and then, you get a shock. Al Hilal does better. Guatemala does better, whatever it is. But a lot of times, that's what it comes down to.
It is going to be interesting, though. Tonight, Dortmund versus Monterrey. That's going to be fun. We'll see what happens. Guys, do you remember Major League Soccer? John, do you remember Major League Soccer?
Oh, only because I write for the website, my friend.
Major League
I'm on
Soccer
that every day.
Well, Major League Soccer still exists. They played 11 games last Wednesday. They played, I think, 14 games last weekend. And we wanted to catch up a little bit on a little bit of a grab bag. I watched a decent bit of the league this weekend for monetary reasons, of course. And Armand, you watched a little bit of the league this weekend. Hate watched maybe a little bit. I want to go into a grab bag here, and I've got 3 topics to discuss. First off, and I can lead quite a bit here. So first off, we need to talk about FC Dallas. We're all based in Dallas. We've all either worked for the team or covered the team for quite a few years. Guys, the vibes are not great in Frisco right now, and they had 2 games this last week. They played Wednesday night at home against San Jose. They played Saturday night against San Diego. 2 California teams. They led in both games. They got 0 points out of both of those games. Gave up, I believe it was 9 goals in those 2 games, and they currently sit. They gave up 7 goals in those 2 games. Not great. They sit 5 points out of a playoff spot. 5 points out of a play-in spot, not a playoff spot. 5 points out of 9th place with 15 games left. Armand, real quick with FC Dallas, what's kind of going through your head right now as you're watching this team and they still have something to salvage out of the season?
They actually didn't play bad against San Diego. I thought they actually were pretty okay. I think we're not super bad, but bad teams figure out ways to lose, and they're a bad team that continuously figure out ways to lose. Look, the problem with FC Dallas, and that's why it's gonna be short, is not really with the coaching staff. It's with the upper management. They don't know how to idea a good roster. They haven't been able to do it for the last 3 coaches, or including Eric Quill, if we include this in there. So, I mean, it's going to be the same old until they figure that out. I mean, that's all it is to it. It's the same story every single season, it seems like.
They've got a home game against Minnesota United on July 4th, which will be another tricky game. Only 7 out of their last 15 matches, though, are against current playoff teams. So they still have a shot to try and get in. Guys, I've had my eye on the Columbus Crew. They struggled through the first part. A weird thing to say, I know.
Someone else bought 10% of them today.
Yeah, hey, going back to what we talked about last week and cashing out, maybe Haslam knows what they're doing. They had 10% sold for $90 million. I think most MLS teams would sell 10% for $90 million right now. No questions asked. Maybe that's a nice little middle ground of, hey, we don't want to sell controlling ownership, but we do want to cash out a little bit. Not a bad way.
And it went to someone that fans know and already owned part of the team, is in the community.
Exactly. And the Haslam family, they just announced their new stadium for the Cleveland Browns, which is going to have not too much public funding.
It looks bad.
It
it's usually stadium renderings, you're like, oh my gosh, they're so sexy, it's so beautiful. This one, I don't know, man. It looks like a warehouse or something. Like one of those trampoline parks for kids.
Shouldn't a team reflect their city a little bit? So Cleveland.
I'm not going to slander Cleveland here.
Cleveland's anyways, I'm not.
I've never been.
Well, I'm not going to slander Cleveland either, because in their last 3, they've played 3 games in June. They had 9 points. They played 7 games in May. They got 7 points. So they got more points out of 3 games in June than they did out of their 7 games in May. And I think they're peaking. They're starting to go like this, which I kind of expected. They're getting Daniel Gazdag integrated. They bought him from Philadelphia, and as their season goes, as Gazdag seasons go, is how their season is going to go. And it feels like they might be a sneaky contender for like a League's Cup to me. That's a team I'm looking at. They played Toluca in the first game. That's going to be a fun one. John, we trust Wilfred Nancy to kind of figure it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the challenge too is maintaining him. France seems like chaos right now. That's always seemed like the most likely destination, especially as other American owners get involved who might be more familiar with Nancy's work or respect it more given, people's perceptions of MLS. So we'll see. I think that's a big trick, is keeping him, because I do definitely agree that they're a team that you trust. You think they're going to get on the rise. We've seen them make smart moves even in the summer in the past. So definitely a team to keep watching, and one where, you trust.
And Armand, they just signed another midfielder, right? I think Columbus just signed another player. But I want to go to you now to wrap it up here. One team, Toronto, made 2 huge moves today. Talk about that real quick.
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a team buy out both their DPs. Well, first off, because
there was a symbolic nature to it, right? This isn't just coincidence that it happens in the same press.
And MLS implemented the rule over the winter that you can have a second buyout. So they bought Bernadeschi and Insigne, which, man, that Toronto team needs a rebuild. I mean, from, those days when they won MLS Cup with Victor Vasquez, when they had Sebastian Giovinco, etc., Now it's just
How do you
like
start with Victor Vasquez, bro?
I don't know.
No,
He's
I
the first one that
respect it.
popped
I
up in my
respect it.
mind. I'm
I
a
respect
ball
it.
knower. What can I say? So
Name
when
3 more players.
Michael Bradley, uh, what was it? Not Clint Irwin. Alex Bono, the keeper,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then Delgado.
All right. Well
Yeah,
done. That's
there you
3
go.
more. That's 3 more than I can name. Who are their center backs? I feel like they had a really good center back as well.
Well, I think Nick Hagland was one of them. Yeah,
Well,
Nick Hagland. He
anyways,
scored the goal against Montreal.
they
But
made 2
that team,
huge moves today. They've
yeah,
got
I
to
mean, and
rebuild.
now they have 2 DP spots. They can kind of figure out what they want to do with it. They shouldn't spend it. They should just try to rebuild, try to talent ID, and just take us to a lost season and move on because this team is terrible for the amount of spending that they spent on. They spent John with both those players. They spent more than Miami does on Messi. Like
That's nuts,
that's
man.
crazy.
You said, Daniel, that it was like kind of symbolic. As someone who has worked in content and even for an Italian team, what would be the most like in your face thing that they could have done? Like a video of the team eating pineapple on pizza, dumping out freshly pulled
That's
shots of espresso. Like, what do you think would have been the most offensive?
They should have made him watch Weston McKennie and Tim Weah's takes on on Italian food and say that they agree with them.
But I'm gonna tell you what, man, I do.
No way.
Italian food, very good, but what they said in that video is that there's not variety. And I think if you go from day to day, whenever I did the tour of Italy, not the Olive Garden dish, although, whenever I did that tour of Italy, I was definitely craving some Thai or like something different at the end. And when you go out to eat, it is a lot of pizza, pasta, pizza.
Right, but
which is great, really good.
Well, there's great seafood too. Each city has their own specialties, and you have to get the specialty of that city. I can understand why living in Turin it would get a little bit old. I think maybe they were, taken out of context a little bit. But they
down to Genoa for some pesto.
Absolutely. They could have made Bernadeschi maybe go to like a CC's. I don't think they have CC's in Canada, but that would have.
Hold on. I don't think they're going to participate in the video of them getting.
You're getting terminated. Have fun at CC's.
Cash.
Yeah, here's
a coupon to CC's. All you can eat buffet.
Well, it doesn't need a coupon. I promise you that if he's getting a buyout.
Let me say though. There's no like anyone who knew Bernadeschi watching him at Juventus knew that this move wouldn't work because he's a very unserious player who cared about way more than soccer. And Giovinco was a guy that every Juventus fan loved and respected. No one liked Bernadeschi. And I think he always saw this as a bit of a payday. And Insigne, it's clear he put in his effort at Napoli. He won the title and then he left. And I think that's where when Toronto FC signs new DPs, they need to be very pragmatic about this and understand what type of player are you getting, what type of mentality are you getting, because I think they've twice in a row now gotten players who saw this as a payday rather than coming in serious, and they saw what they got out of it. So we'll see what they do. I mean, John, give me one name. If they were to look to sign a Canadian, potentially a Canadian national teamer who maybe would be a good fit, like with Toronto, do you think that there would be anyone from Canada that's looking to come back, or would a Eustachio come back?
Yeah, I mean that's actually a decent one comeback. He's never really been. I was going to say Jonathan David would be great, but obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
get him after Juventus, and then see if you get another Juventus washout.
I was going to say they're 1 for 3 on those, so maybe they could get to 50-50. Well, that'll wrap us up for this week. Enjoy the Gold Cup semifinals and finals. We will see who wins it, and we will catch you next time.